Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. In this column, the writer evaluates how inequalities are rising in a digital world, particularly in the healthcare sector and in the education sector. See, technology is considered to be a great enabler and a leveler. There is no doubt that the adoption of technology enables us to provide better delivery of services, that is, welfare services such as education and health. And at the same time, greater adoption of technology in the delivery of services also creates a level playing field, which actually helps in reducing inequalities in the society. But at the same time, a flawed adoption of a digital world could also increase inequalities and it could deprive the vulnerable sections of the society from accessing essential and basic services such as education and healthcare. We have been witnessing this in a pandemic hit world where economic and social inequities are already rising. And upon this, the prevailing digital divide in the country is further leading to the worsening of inequalities, thereby denying access to essential and basic services to the vulnerable population. See, the pandemic has already taken a huge economic and social toll, where millions of people have either lost their jobs or either they have suffered from an income shock. And along with that, they have been struggling to access basic welfare measures that are being provided by the government. In two particular sectors of welfare, that is, education and health, we already had a lot of prevailing inequalities. But now, in a pandemic stricken world, the wider adoption of digital solutions and the prevailing digital divide has further increased these inequalities, thereby significantly affecting the access of vulnerable populations to healthcare and basic education. See, as the pandemic broke out, the education sector immediately shifted online in the interest of ensuring uninterrupted education. There is no doubt that online learning and e-learning have enabled the government and the private players to continue delivering uninterrupted education, and it has helped in minimizing the impact of lockdowns on students. But at the same time, the sudden shift to online education and e-learning has deprived millions of students from accessing basic education. The biggest challenge with regard to the widespread adoption of online education is ensuring equitable access to online learning resources. A large number of students and households may not have access to digital and smart devices, and they may not even have access to basic internet and the right kind of learning environment at home. Data from the National Sample Survey of 2017 shows that only 6% of the rural households and 25% of the urban households own a computer. Then even access to internet is not universal either. According to data, 17% in rural areas and 42% in urban areas are able to have access to the internet. So in such a context, when online education becomes the norm, the rural population of the country and the poor in the country who do not have access to these devices and internet, they tend to lose out, whereas the privileged class, that is the upper and the middle classes, and as well as the urban population, they will be able to easily procure access to these basic services. And thus, those students get ahead of the learning curve as a result of their privilege, as compared to students from the disadvantaged classes. So those households which are tech disabled, that is those who don't own smart devices, those who don't have access to the internet, and those who are not digitally literate to access or operate these devices, their children get left behind the learning curve, and this further increases the learning divide in the country. Studies conducted by NCERT, the Azim Premji Foundation, Oxfam, and ASER shows that between 27 to 60% of the students could not access online education, not just due to the question of access, but also due to the unavailability of the right kind of learning environment. Because to enable seamless online education, you not only need smart devices and internet, but you also need a right environment at home where the students can learn at peace. But in a country where majority of the households have a single room, or in houses which are already overcrowded, Students may not be able to get a peaceful zone for learning, whereas children from the upper and the middle classes who live in bigger homes, who have their own separate rooms, will be able to enjoy a much more peaceful learning environment that allows them to concentrate better during online classes, as compared to children from poor households who may not have the privilege of accessing such learning environments. Then, upon this, when education shifts entirely online, students stand to lose out on the benefits of peer to peer learning because, in a classroom environment, that is, in a physical classroom, children tend to learn from one another due to peer competition and peer pressure, and such peer to peer learning can never be replaced through online learning. Then, of course, there is the limitation of online classes in grooming the social skills of children. And when these aspects of education are ignored by the state itself, and when a blind adoption of online education is taken up, the digital divide is going to increase these inequalities, thereby depriving a large percentage of the student population from accessing quality education. Something similar is happening with regard to healthcare as well, because the government's excessive focus on app based digital solutions for dealing with the pandemic has increased health inequality, and it is depriving the masses from accessing quality healthcare, that too during a pandemic. See, right now, for booking beds, for arranging essential drugs, for procuring oxygen, and for booking vaccination slots, for everything, the government has relied excessively on app based solutions. And while such technology can be a great enabler and leveler, it also creates numerous practical problems and promotes health inequality mainly due to issues of access. When the pandemic broke out, the government came out with many app based digital solutions, such as the Arogya Setu app. This contact tracing app was supposed to help the authorities in contact tracing and in containing the pandemic. And along with this, the CoWIN portal, which has been integrated with the Arogya Setu app, was supposed to drive the country's vaccination program. And for the purposes of verification, the government has relied upon identification documents such as the Aadhaar, and the back-end digital infrastructure of the Aadhaar is being used to drive India's vaccination program and as well as to determine the access of Indians to basic healthcare during the pandemic. Because from allotment of beds to procuring drugs and oxygen and for getting a vaccination shot, the government has mandated registration documents such as Aadhaar, and such ID based verification has been made essential for accessing apps such as CoWIN and Arogya Setu. While these digital solutions are definitely helping us in battling the pandemic, and while they have definitely made it easier for a large percentage of the population to access these healthcare services, at the same time, it is depriving millions of people from accessing these very services because a blind adoption of digital solutions doesn't take into account the digital divide that is prevalent in the country. Because of these digital healthcare solutions, many people in the country are being denied access to healthcare and vaccination, and particularly the vulnerable population from the rural areas and from the poor and lower sections of the society who may not have access to phones, computers, and internet, and those who are technologically disabled, those who don't know how to navigate these apps and devices. They have been losing out, whereas the upper and the middle classes, which are familiar and comfortable with these digital apps, they have been cornering all the benefits of these applications and solutions. Now look at the trend that has emerged with regard to vaccination. Now that in urban areas all the vaccination slots are filled up, the educated and richer urban class is shifting towards rural areas just for the sake of vaccination, where plenty of vaccination slots are still open because people in the rural areas, they don't know how to use these apps. And this emerging trend clearly highlights the digital divide and how it further increases inequalities in the society. In the coming months, this trend is only going to continue, and the educated and richer urban class who are not able to find slots in urban areas, they will continue using their digital advantage on the CoWIN platform, and they will continue booking vaccination slots in rural areas, thereby depriving the rural population and the lower sections of the society which are not able to use these platforms, thus further increasing the healthcare inequality in the country. Then the widespread adoption of such digital solutions without adequate checks and balances also raises the question of privacy, that is data privacy, because many of these apps are collecting sensitive data, and there are fears that the government might use this data to create a centralized digital health database, which could be exploited by the public and private healthcare service providers. And in a country where we don't have a data protection law, such widespread collection of healthcare data and its centralization could compromise the data privacy of the citizens, leading to their exploitation by private healthcare providers, including health insurance companies. And these legitimate fears and concerns are yet to be addressed by the government. See, there is no doubt that digitization of healthcare data is very beneficial in promoting the delivery of healthcare services. But the problem lies in the centralization of this data. If you look at countries like France and even in Taiwan, digital health cards have been created wherein the digital health data of an individual is stored on these cards, but this is a decentralized database. This reduces the burden on the patient to carry all his healthcare records, and it helps in streamlining healthcare services. But if the health data of citizens is digitized and centralized, and if there are no adequate checks and balances, then such data can be easily misused, especially when it falls into the wrong hands. And the private healthcare sector in particular would like to misuse this data for its own advantage. Now, this could have serious consequences in a country where public healthcare spending is extremely low. In India, public healthcare spending is hardly 1% of the GDP, and most of the country's healthcare expenditure is coming from the pockets of the patients, that is, out of pocket expenditure is very high. And it is this privatization of healthcare in the country which has increased the healthcare inequalities in India. Upon this, the poorly designed digital healthcare solutions is further going to aggravate these healthcare inequalities, and the entire burden of this digital inequity has to be borne by the vulnerable sections of the society. Hence, the writer is asking us to exercise caution while blindly adopting digital solutions, and the responsibility lies with the state, that is the government, to balance the pros and cons of a digital world while ensuring equitable access to basic welfare, especially healthcare and education. Next, on page number 7, we have a column in which the writer makes a case for a national health service in India modeled on the lines of the popular British NHS. See, the NHS, or the National Health Service in Britain, is a very popular institution, and it is clearly the most loved and most trusted institution in the country. In fact, many citizens of Britain hold the NHS in greater regard than the monarchy itself. That's because the British NHS delivers high quality healthcare which is universal and free. This legendary healthcare model of Britain was born in the aftermath of the World Wars, when Britain was attempting to transform itself into a welfare state by trying to democratize healthcare as a social service. The NHS model of Britain is a mighty achievement in public policy, and it shows how high quality services can be delivered by the state without any inequality or targeting, that too free of cost. Under the NHS, the patients in Britain are eligible to receive top class healthcare service from general practitioners and specialists, and they not only receive treatment, but even their prescription and essential drugs are provided free of cost, along with outpatient services and free follow ups. Under the NHS, even private healthcare practitioners are paid through the NHS system for treating patients who are registered under the NHS. This system also funds high quality research and training in the field of healthcare, and it has successfully established a highly localized access to healthcare. Today, the NHS is the largest employer in Britain, and it employs around 1.1 million people. And this staff of dedicated doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, they deliver high quality healthcare to the patients. And all of this is entirely free of cost, and it is universally applicable, meaning every citizen can access these services free of cost once they are registered under the NHS. The total budget of NHS stands at around a staggering 7.6% of Britain's GDP, and it is this high spending on public healthcare by the government which guarantees quality healthcare which is universal and free, and the entire budget of NHS is funded through general taxation. So essentially, the people of Britain equitably share the burden, which in turn guarantees equitable quality access to healthcare for everyone. Now, this success story of Britain is in stark contrast to India's healthcare system. It's a well acknowledged fact that India's healthcare system is highly fragmented, and whatever quality healthcare services are available are largely concentrated in the private sector. And this has led the country's healthcare sector to become urban and elite centric. That is, while the rich and the upper middle classes have access to quality healthcare, the poor and the lower sections of the society are deprived of quality healthcare. And this is a direct result of our poor spending, that is, public spending on healthcare. India's public healthcare budget is hardly 1% of its GDP, and the overall healthcare spending of India, which stands at 3.6% of the GDP, largely consists of private healthcare expenditure, which is entirely comprised of out of pocket expenditure. That is, the patients themselves are paying for their healthcare, and it is only the urban elite and the rich and the upper classes which can afford this quality healthcare. In the public sector, the government hospitals and the primary healthcare centers have been trying to do their best. But apart from a few exceptions, most of the government institutions have failed in delivering quality healthcare, and their reach and their quality of services are simply inadequate to satisfy the needs and demands of India's healthcare sector. In fact, it is astonishing that in some rural areas, the doctor to population ratio stands at 1 is to 40,000. And this statistic alone tells you the entire story about India's healthcare system. So now that the country is facing its biggest ever crisis in the form of the COVID-19 pandemic, the writer argues that the time has come for India to adopt a NHS model which provides for universal free healthcare driven by public spending, which is entirely funded through general taxation. And one such model, based on the British model, was proposed in 1946 by a civil servant known as Joseph Bohr. And the writer says that the time has come for India to consider such proposals and adopt the British NHS model by customizing it to suit the Indian context and Indian requirements. See, compared to any other crisis that India has faced, be it any war, be it any natural disaster, or be it any economic crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic simply has to be the biggest crisis the country has ever dealt with. And the horrors that the country has witnessed in the last 1.5 months should motivate the government to carry out a complete rethink of the country's healthcare system. The British NHS model offers a ready solution, and with a little policy innovation, India can definitely adopt the model by customizing it to the Indian context. Next, we have multiple articles in the newspaper related to the ongoing vaccination program. This column on page number 7 evaluates the impact of vaccination in reducing and containing the spread of SARS coronavirus 2. Analysis of available data clearly shows that now that India has vaccinated most of the senior citizens, that is, those above the age of 60 years, a clear fall in infection rate has been noticed in this age group. And this is very evident from these graphs that deal with infections and vaccination rates in Tamil Nadu, particularly in Chennai. You can clearly see that as the vaccination campaign covered those above the age of 60 years, the infection rate amongst those who are above 60 years clearly started to fall and decline, thus indicating the efficacy of these vaccines. This clearly establishes that the only practical and long-term solution to contain the pandemic is to achieve a high degree of vaccination, which in turn will help in establishing herd immunity. In this context, there's another column on page number 7 that evaluates the flaws in India's vaccination program. After a successful initial rollout, India's vaccination program has hit several roadblocks, and currently the biggest challenge in India's vaccination program is the severe shortage being faced by state governments and union territories. This shortage, accompanied with the opening up of vaccines for all age groups, that is above 18 years, has led to a huge rush wherein all the vaccination slots have been booked out for weeks together, even with many citizens yet to receive their second dose. This crisis in India's vaccination program can be attributed to several flaws in India's strategy, which clearly should have been addressed at the very beginning of the vaccination program. First and foremost, India's heavy reliance on just 2 private vaccines has cost the country, because these companies, that is Bharat Biotech and Serum Institute of India, they've been unable to scale up their vaccine production, and the government failed to have the foresight to predict this upcoming shortage as a result of poor production. While dealing with a pandemic of this proportion, the priority should have been to vaccinate a vast majority of the country's population as quickly as possible. Now it has been nearly 5 months since India rolled out its vaccination program, and just around 16 crore people have been vaccinated, which is a very small percentage of the country's population. At the very beginning of the vaccination program, the government knew very well that India would require at least 2.8 billion doses, and accordingly, the government should have made advanced planning and placed advance orders, not just with two companies in India, but it should have considered opening up the program to many other vaccines, which were readily available around the world. With regard to production, licensing, supply, and distribution, the government could have shown greater farsightedness before sending out millions of doses of vaccines to friendly countries as a goodwill gesture. While the export of vaccines under Vaccine Maitri was a diplomatic initiative aimed at generating goodwill for India, along with fulfilling India's obligations as the global pharmacy, but this decision to export vaccines comes into question when the country itself had to deal with severe shortage months later. Experts argue that these challenges were to be expected and they should have been factored in. And if such a massive vaccination program had to succeed, then it required the direct leadership of the center, because in the past, India has considerable experience of executing such complex vaccination programs through which we have successfully eliminated diseases like polio, smallpox, etc. The required expertise, infrastructure, and knowledge was available, and the two private vaccines which were approved for emergency usage could have been nationalized by the government, and the formulas could have been licensed out or contracted out to other companies as well, which would have helped in ramping up India's production. If the government had placed enough advance orders, and if India had diversified its vaccine candidates, then the export of vaccines wouldn't have affected the domestic rollout of the vaccination program. Then, upon this, experts have argued that the government has prematurely opened up the vaccination program to those above 18 years, because those above 45 years are yet to be fully vaccinated, and many are facing the risk of losing out their second dose, because as a result of the sudden rush, most of the vaccination slots have been filled up for weeks together, thereby exposing the older population to higher risk and vulnerability. Then, upon this, with this change in policy, the center has delegated the responsibility largely to state governments and to the private sector. And this is something that has never been done in the past when it comes to the rollout of critical vaccines in the country. All the earlier critical vaccination programs have been led by the center with the support of the states and the local administration. And ideally, that model should have been followed, accompanied with advanced planning to scale up production and to diversify the vaccines by ramping up licensing and supply and distribution. Then, upon this, the differential pricing policy that the center has come out with places an unnecessary burden on a large percentage of the population, and even though many people can afford the cost, it ends up creating an inequity in the vaccination program where the poor and the vulnerable will have to depend on free vaccines provided by the government, whereas the rich and the elite can hope to get vaccinated faster, thereby further increasing health inequity in the country. According to experts, even in developed economies where healthcare is largely privatized, for example in countries like US, vaccines are being rolled out free of cost, considering that the pandemic is a national healthcare emergency. So that being the global trend, such exorbitant pricing is unfair, and it also hampers the vaccination program in many different ways. In this context, the writer argues that India can speed up its vaccination program and fix the flaws by looking at other readily available vaccine candidates, which will help in diversifying the vaccination program. Right now, India is in an advanced stage of rolling out Russia's Sputnik vaccine, so this is going to be a big boost for India's vaccination program. On similar lines, other readily available vaccine candidates should be considered, and by scaling up domestic production and global procurement, India will have to speed up the vaccination drive if it hopes to contain the pandemic as soon as possible. Next, on page number 6, we have a related editorial which talks about the impact of IPR waiver with regard to the production of COVID-19 vaccines. This is a topic that we have covered multiple times in the last few days, and I expect you to go through this editorial once. The crux of the article is that the IPR waiver, which US has agreed to, in line with the proposal that was made by India and South Africa at the WTO, is not going to bring immediate relief to developing and underdeveloped nations which are facing a vaccine shortage. Because on one hand, getting this WTO proposal approved will take a lot of time as there is resistance from many European countries such as Germany. And without consensus, such proposals cannot be approved at the WTO. And even if approved with the support of countries like US and France, the scaling up of domestic production in developing and underdeveloped countries is going to take a longer time, thereby delaying our fight against the pandemic. Hence, the editorial suggests that while the IPR waiver proposal is being pursued at the WTO, without any further delay, developed countries which already have excess supplies, they should immediately start sharing their stockpile with developing and underdeveloped nations like India and South Africa, which are facing a shortage. Next, on page number 8, we have an article which refers to the efforts being made by the Indian Armed Forces to ease the crunch in essential medical supplies that are being faced by the country as a result of the second wave of the pandemic. As the country is facing a crippling shortage of essential medical supplies such as oxygen, oxygen concentrators, essential drugs, and test kits, the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force have launched a massive logistics mission to bring in these essential supplies from countries that are ready to donate these supplies to India. So, to facilitate this transfer, the Indian Navy has launched Operation Samudra Setu Part 2, under which large naval ships such as INS Airavat have been transporting oxygen and other essential medical supplies from many countries. Countries like Singapore, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, France, and many others have reached out to India with essential medical supplies, and the Indian Navy is assisting some of these countries in dispatching these essential items to India. On similar lines, emergency airlifts are being carried out by the Indian Air Force, both within India and outside of India. The relief material that is coming in from foreign countries is being distributed within the country through Indian Air Force. And the heavy lift transport aircrafts of the Indian Air Force have also been bringing in supplies from some of the friendly countries. See, Operation Samudra Setu 2 of the Indian Navy is a continuation of the first edition of this mission, through which the Indian Navy brought back stranded Indians in foreign countries during last year's lockdown following the breakout of the pandemic. Next, on page number 1 and 8, we have an article that refers to the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. This program was launched last year by the Government of India to guarantee food security, especially to migrant workers and to the lower sections of the society, which was severely affected by last year's lockdown. Under this food security scheme, the government has been distributing 5 kilograms of free rice or wheat, along with few other essential items, in order to tackle the problem of hunger and malnutrition, which has been aggravated by the pandemic and the lockdowns. After last year's successful execution of the first phase of this mission, the second edition has been launched as a result of the second wave of the pandemic. Under this second version, the government was planning to reach out to around 80 crore beneficiaries and deliver 40 lakh tons of free food grains to them. After being questioned in the Supreme Court as to what measures the government had taken to guarantee food security to migrant workers and the poor population, the government has informed that in the first 10 days of the implementation of this scheme, the government has already delivered 1 lakh tons of food grain to around 2 crore beneficiaries. Now let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: technological changes in education and health are worsening inequities. In the light of the statement, evaluate the rising inequality in a digital world. The second question: is it time for India to have a national health service based on the British model? Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.